Hey, everybody. Welcome back once again. Another episode of Your Heels on the Ground with Ellen Mitchell. I'm Bruce Silverman along with Ellen Mitchell. We have a very special guest with us, Sharon Walker, an attorney extraordinaire. And Ellen, before we even get started, let's just introduce Sharon so the folks know who she is and why she is joining us today.
I would love to. Thank you. Sharon Walker is an incredible real estate attorney. She's licensed both in the state of Florida as well as Jamaica. I work with her on almost every single one of my real estate transactions, whether I'm representing the buyer or the seller, because she is able to do things that other real estate attorneys are not able to do. She also winds up oftentimes catching mistakes that save my clients money. So love Sharon. She's awesome. And I'd rather bring her in the beginning than have her jump in the middle when something's gone a little awry.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you so much, Bruce. It was very flattering introductions. It's a pleasure to work with both of you on all matters, I have to say.
Well, we might as well just jump right into it since everybody has their description and their profile and their CV now in this episode. So we're just going to jump right in. First question that we're going to deal with is probate closings versus traditional sales. Many people, most people, if they've been involved in any kind of real estate transaction in the past, they understand what a traditional sale is. They understand what a traditional closing is. But obviously, probate has a lot more factors involved because in the closing, one of the issues is that at least one of the property holders is deceased. And that is the reason why the property is in probate, needs to be handled differently. That's correct, right, Sharon?
That is absolutely correct, Bruce. A probate sale differs from a regular traditional sale in that a probate home or property is basically sold under the supervision of a probate court. So it brings in another element and a lot of set of steps that we have to kind of overcome to actually transfer title and transfer property ownership.
And I find that a lot of clients use probate as a catch-all phrase. It may not actually be a true probate. It may be in a trust, in which case there would be a trustee appointed, or it may be in a true probate where there's a personal representative, sometimes called an executor in other states, that is assigned by the court to execute all of the documents. So we know the difference between, a trust sale and a probate sale, but for the public, it's kind of a catch-all phrase, meaning someone has passed and that the property is being sold by the heirs, whether through probate or through the trust process.
And so what are some of the challenges that both of you have found when you're dealing with probates that people really need to be conscious of so that they don't fall into those same pitfalls that you've dealt with as well?
So one of the main challenges, particularly the first challenge, is who's executing the contract. And as Ellen so eloquently just explained a while ago, there are distinctions between a regular probate as well as a property that's been in a trust that is being transferred as a result of a death. So all of these different ways of holding title and ways transferred depends on who's signing, who has the authority to sign and bind, whether it's the estate or the trust, into contract, and that individual is empowered or authorized to make the decisions in terms of price setting, etc. And so that's the first thing that you have to do, because you don't want to enter into something and then get further along down the road only to find out that this individual was not authorized or has any kind of ability to bind the estate.
Now, Ellen, on your side of things, you're almost like the first line of defense. And in some cases, you're the second line of defense, where you may get involved before the probate attorney does. In some cases, you'll get involved after the probate attorney, but both of those happen before it goes to Sharon. So what are some of the experiences that you've had, either in that first position or second position, that you've almost had to go through the checklist with clients to get them ready to go over to Sharon to get ready for the closing?
Those are all great questions. So if it is a probate property, I need to make sure that they have a probate attorney, which is required in the state of Florida, and the probate has been filed with the court. Then there are different timelines. If it's a homestead property, it does not necessarily have to go through the creditor period. If it's not a homestead property, it has to go through the creditor period, which will be a time frame in which the property typically cannot close until it's gone through that creditor period. So each situation is unique, and it's important. You're right. Sometimes people come to me after a death, but prior to opening probate, they may not know that they need to consult with a probate attorney and open probate. So it's my obligation to advise them, to introduce them to a good probate attorney, and have that probate opened with the courts, and have the personal representative appointed, and then knowing who that person is and having that person sign the listing agreement and the sales contract. And I do work very closely with the probate attorney in terms of who signs, the timeline for closing, creditor period versus not, homestead versus not, to make sure that we're moving along in the correct manner and not passing any red lights as we go.
Now, Sharon, a question for you is, you're a veteran attorney in this aspect of law. How much easier is it to work with someone like Ellen, who is trained and educated in probate specifically, rather than just a regular realtor that doesn't have the knowledge and experience that Ellen does? Does that make your job that much easier and prevent some of the major issues that happen just before or during a closing?
It's a vast difference. I mean, working with someone like Ellen, who specializes in this particular area of law, makes a whole world of difference with regards to how the transaction is going to go forward and the expectations of the clients, which is the most important part. And it's not just a little extra certifications that she has at the end of her name. Literally, her ability and her knowledge of the process, of what's needed, of what steps are next, facilitates everybody in the transaction, and it allows us to get all the documents necessary to close, to transfer title, and address and sometimes even foresee possible issues that might occur. For example, Ellen has always been proactive in all of these matters. A lot of the times she will request, and I will, on her request, undertake a preliminary search of permits or preliminary search of items, because sometimes, again, this is property that's passing to a beneficiary or an executive of the estate. They don't necessarily reside on that property. They don't know anything about the property. So all the elements that you would not know unless you lived there or are very closely associated with the person who deceased, who passed away, you would not have that information. So she makes the actions of going ahead and seeing what's popping up preliminarily, so that we can at least start to address that from before we even enter into contract.
All right, let's talk about some of the success stories that the two of you have had together in getting listings from one end of the process to the other. Obviously, the other being closing it and getting the transaction completed. I know that you had one where there was over $500,000 in fines on the property. And Sharon, you were able to negotiate that down to less than 10%. Ellen, before Sharon talks about how she was able to accomplish that, lay the groundwork on what the background story is on that.
So the background on this one, it was an estate. The father passed and left the property to his two sons. The father had unfortunately been approached by people that said they wanted to live in the home, and in lieu of paying rent, they would make needed repairs. Well, the needed repairs were not made. There were roof issues, and the city was involved, and they were getting a daily fine as long as these issues were not taken care of. The tenants that were in the property were not paying rent. They were not making the repairs, and actually they were renting out the backyard to homeless people. So that was the state that we were in when we took the asset, and it the asset didn't even sell for $500,000. There's no way that the property owners could pay $500,000 in fines and fees. And in fact, it's typical that you would go in and negotiate these fees down. Oftentimes the city, they just want the property to come into a compliance. They're getting all kinds of complaints for neighbors. And so they don't really want to obstruct the sale. They want the new property owner to come in, fix up the property, enhance it, and take the burden off of the neighbors and the people in the area from having to look at an eyesore and be dealing with all kinds of craziness going on. So I've set the stage for Miss Walker here.
All right, so Sharon, you're up.
Well,
How were you able to take that information, go to the city, and get the fines reduced so that the property could be sold?
So with the information that Ellen was able to provide, we did a more extensive search and determined exactly when the violations were impugned or basically started to accrue interest and judgments, etc. The final total, we discovered there was another lien on the property with another city, adjoining city, that also tacked in. And there was over $680,000 worth of fines in that one, and the $243,000 with the city in which the property was located, both of which would have to be satisfied upon sale. The property was definitely not worth those two. So we demonstrated to the city ordinance, the city of Hollywood and the city of Dania Beach, that the property is it's actually under contract. And of course, it's the best interest of the city to have it done. We had to coordinate with the roofers and with the other construction people to make sure that it's at least in a condition of habitability. We also had to ensure that the tenants, so-called daily renters, were evicted from the property. Ms. Ellen took on that, and have the code compliance officers come out to do follow-up inspections and negotiate down based on the sale value and the amount of liens. So we were able to get them down. The $245,000 was down to $7,000, and the $680,000, we got it down to $15,000.
All right, so a couple of follow-up questions. The first one is, how is it that a property could be in one city, but two cities could be involved?
Because the penalties with regards to one city, this particular estate, he had two properties, and that's where it comes into homestead. Because he also had a violation in the adjoining city, they were able to put this lien on all properties that had his name on it. And this was one of them. So it wasn't necessarily just the issues or fines relating to the specific property being sold. If the liens were applied, and just like a federal lien, IRS lien, that was also another one that was on this property, we had to satisfy all property liens in order to transfer the property. So it was City of Dania Beach, City of Hollywood, IRS, and the state of Florida. All of them had liens on this property.
So it was an easy case.
Simple, crazy, thanks to Ellen.
How much more difficult would a situation like this have been if it was a realtor without the knowledge and the experience that Ellen has?
First and foremost, it would have been very difficult because the expectations are, with a regular transaction, open, contract, sign, close. Ellen was able to identify all the issues prior to signing the contract. So we knew we were going to deal with liens, to manage the expectations of the buyer so they understood that this was actually in the works. And she worked very closely with the probate court as well, and the city, as well as other contractors, to try and resolve the issues. And I'll give this not just because she's here in front of me right now and she's saved me so many times. It's not just her ability and her knowledge of probate. It's also her knowledge and her contact list of individuals of who can she call to come in and address the situation. And she has a great book of business that has everybody in there that she can say, hey, we're going to get this one out there to do this, coordinate with the city. She went back out there to meet with the code compliance inspectors so we could try to adhere to all of the rules and regulations and make sure everything gets passed in time for closing.
Not to mention working with the eviction attorney before any of that could take place to have the quote unquote tenants evicted from the property. It was no easy feat.
That is not a normal realtor duty. I have to stress, she goes above and beyond. I have dealt with many, many realtors in my lifetime, and I actually was a realtor at one point in time. And I very rarely see those who literally go above and beyond like she does. Because in addition to that, we also had open permits. Ellen was able to liaison with an open permit company who I spoke with as well, and they had to jump in addition to all of this, to close these permits out correctly, as well as address the violations for the city. So there was never a dull moment on this file. If ever there was a teachable file, this would be it, because anything that you can think of, it happened.
It's like I have said many times about Ellen being a specialist in probate. It's about the passion and the compassion. Before we wrap up this episode and we wrap up this discussion, Sharon had mentioned, Ellen, that you took care of all of these things prior to even going to contract. Seems to me as a layperson that is a tremendous amount of work to do prior to a contract being signed. And there's no guarantee that once you do all of those things that you are going to get that contract, correct?
That's true, but I really feel like I don't work with people to get a contract on the property. I really work with people to help them through a difficult time and get the property sold. And anything I can do up front to make things easier on the back end, I always want to do that. I always want to go above and beyond for my clients. In this case, they had lost their father. It was a very difficult time. So anything we could do to make this, less painful and less difficult for the adult children, we certainly wanted to do. And thankfully we were able to do.
And they were actually out of state as well. So Ellen's ability to be the communication piece for them and the heels on the ground over here was definitely something that they appreciated tremendously, and they expressed it to me on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, that lien that's going today, we have a closing for one of the last properties for that particular client, and they also mentioned her again.
Passion and compassion, as I said, just keeps coming up. Every episode we do, there's just another example of that with Ellen. Great conversation, ladies. We're going to have another one in the next episode. So great time for us to say goodbye to everybody. And Ellen, Sharon, thank you very much for sharing this knowledge and experience. And we're going to do a lot more with the next episode. So for Sharon and Ellen, I'm Bruce. Thanks so much for being with us on another episode of Your Heels on the Ground with Ellen Mitchel.